This occurred a few months back during spring. It was that peculiar, transitional phase of my life. I had just graduated, had no real responsibilities yet, and found myself with an overwhelming amount of free time. Finishing school a semester early had seemed brilliant when I was buried in work, but once I actually had this expanse of time, I was utterly lost. My full-time job didn't start until June, and most of my friends were still occupied with classes or finals. So, until then, I was just adrift, feeling stuck in the limbo between two chapters. It was genuinely unsettling and made me feel worthless, as I'm someone who always needs to be productive. Sitting around for days on end, simply watching time pass was agonizing. That's likely why I agreed when my mom asked me to check on my Uncle Rick's beach house. It was a simple favor: drive down to Rehoboth Beach, ensure nothing was leaking or damaged, and handle some minor maintenance to save Rick the cost of a handyman. I should mention I'm from Pennsylvania, and Rick's place is in Delaware, so the drive isn't bad, just over 2 hours. The house itself is massive, the kind that comfortably fits our entire extended family every summer. All 25 of us packed in, playing games and drinking too much, which are honestly our family's only two distinctive activities. The house isn't directly on the shoreline, but isn't far from the beach either, nestled in a quieter neighborhood lined with tall beach grass and winding roads. Fast forward to some random weekday, I can't even recall, a Thursday maybe. I left in the late afternoon, which in hindsight was probably a mistake. The drive was uneventful. Upon arrival, everything seemed normal. I went inside and ran through Rick's checklist, checking faucets and breakers and walking the property. Everything was fine. To be honest, it felt strange being there alone. I'd never seen the house without board games scattered about and crowds of noisy relatives. The silence was the most eerie part. The place felt abandoned. I'm sure everyone has a place like that, a house or restaurant that gets rowdy with family, and picturing it empty and silent is kind of spooky. Anyway, it was getting late and I hate driving at night, so I texted my mom to say I'd stay over and head back in the morning. She agreed and reminded me to thank Uncle Rick, which I did. After making some food and wasting time on my phone, I started getting ready for bed. Normally during gatherings, I'd get stuck in a small third-floor room while others claimed the nicer ones. I'm not complaining, just stating how it worked. Having the house to myself, I decided to take advantage and chose the master bedroom on the second floor with its private bathroom, walk-in closet, and incredibly comfortable bed. The choice was easy. I climbed into bed around midnight and drifted off quickly. I don't recall what time it was when I woke, only that a sound from the closet startled me awake. Still groggy, I was certain something had fallen in there. Without a sound, I tilted my head to look at the closet, my heart already pounding. My mind was alert, but my body refused to move, not paralysis, but a deep unwillingness. I didn't want to find out if something was in there. I squeezed my eyes shut and willed myself back to sleep, almost succeeding until I heard it again, a muffled thump from the closet. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. Then, as if seized by an invisible force, I lay there in true paralysis, utterly unable to move. I finally understood what it meant to be frozen in place. In horror, I listened as the closet door creaked open and through barely open eyes, watched a dark figure step into the room. It stood motionless beside the bed, watching me for what felt like 20 impossibly long seconds before silently turning and leaving. I stayed still, barely breathing. The footsteps moved across the floor, but instead of heading downstairs, they creaked up to the third floor. My stomach churned. The only staircase led up there, with no exit. My mind screamed at me to act, but fear held me. I couldn't overpower a grown man, had no idea if he was armed. All I could do was wait. After a few agonizing moments, I mustered the courage to break free, quietly reached for my phone, and dialed 911, whispering to the dispatcher that someone was in the house. I slipped out of bed, locked the bedroom door, and waited. Minutes dragged by until flashing red and blue lights lit the windows. I was shocked by how quickly the police arrived. I ran downstairs, threw open the front door, and nearly collapsed in relief. They stormed inside, moving swiftly through the house while I waited outside. It didn't take them long to report the house was empty. I was in disbelief. I'd heard the footsteps go up, and with nowhere to go, he must have still been there. The police insisted he must have slipped past me, that I was too panicked to notice. I knew that wasn't true, but what could I say? The guy had vanished. Uncomfortable with him leaving, I called Rick, who snapped at the police, demanding they search again, insisting my life might have depended on it. So they did, more thoroughly this time. Rick told me to follow them, and I did, watching as they opened every closet, checked under beds, tapped walls, pulled back shower curtains, and rechecked locks. That's when they found it. A bedroom window on the 3rd floor, the room I should have been in, was unlocked. One officer stayed inside, while the other went downstairs to the back deck. I joined him outside, too sickened by the thought of being locked in with a stranger. The officer scanned the property with his flashlight, finding nothing, until his beam swept the roof and illuminated something terrifying. The stranger, a disgusting-looking bald man in tattered clothing who appeared not to have showered in years, just sitting there. The next hour was a blur. The police communicated, got the man off the roof in cuffs, and suggested he was likely homeless, squatting for days or longer. But when asked how he got in, how long he'd been there, or why he was hiding in the closet, he gave no answers, just maintained an eerie, vacant stare. He was in a police car shortly after. The whole incident remains so crazy, it's hard to wrap my head around. I still can't figure out why he was hiding in that closet of all places. Perhaps he heard me enter and hid in the first spot he thought of. I don't know how he got in, and Rick doesn't either. Since it's impossible to reach the roof from the ground, that explanation seems illogical. The rest of the family has insisted Rick improve his home security, but he's refused every time for reasons I can't explain. The thought persists. Had I been sleeping in my assigned room that night, things might have ended very differently. My friend Mike has a beach house on the Jersey Shore, and calling it beautiful would be an understatement. To me, it feels magnificent, especially coming from a more modest background. I don't know its full history, as it's not my family's place, but from what I understand, it's been in his family for generations. Mike's grandparents had long wanted to make it their permanent home, but they sadly passed away recently. With no one living there now, the house sits dormant most of the time since his extended family is on the West Coast and his parents are too busy to use it much. The silver lining in this otherwise sad situation is that Mike essentially has free access whenever he wants. I think his dad considered renting it out for extra income, but finding someone to rent a beach house in the off-season isn't easy, so you can't really blame him. Sometime in mid-July, Mike reached out and asked if I wanted to come down for the weekend. He didn't have to twist my arm. I had no plans, and the idea of relaxing at a nice beach house was an easy yes. His plan was simple. Hang out, maybe hit the beach during the day, then head to the boardwalk at night, and just enjoy the shore. It wasn't meant to be a wild party weekend, just a chill escape, and I was genuinely looking forward to it. Since we live close, Mike picked me up that Friday, I tossed my duffel in his trunk, and we made the drive down. The first night was relaxed. We arrived around 6, dropped our stuff in the upstairs bedrooms, and settled in. The house has that cozy, slightly musty beach smell. A mix of salt air and old wood, not unpleasant, but like it holds decades of family summers. After grabbing a quick bite from a nearby sub shop, we decided to walk the beach to take in the evening. Mike brought a couple of fishing rods, so we tried our luck for a while, though it was less about catching anything and more about just being out there. At one point, we came across a pair of girls our age walking barefoot along the shoreline, and Mike, being himself, struck up a conversation. They were local, or at least semi-local, and it turned into one of those low-stakes, slightly flirtatious interactions that happen when you're young and on the beach at night. We got their numbers, they continued their walk, and we kept fishing. Even though it was peak season and there were plenty of people around, Mike knew all the quiet pockets, private beach access, tucked away paths through the dunes, little spots between houses where the lights didn't reach. We found a nice stretch to ourselves where the only sounds were the water and the wind, the kind of night that lets you forget about real life for a bit. The next morning, we woke around 9 and decided to go for a run along the boardwalk. It was already warm, but a breeze off the ocean made it bearable. We weren't pushing hard, just a couple of miles to get the blood flowing. Mike is pretty active, and I've been trying to stay in shape, so it felt good to move after a night of lounging. The rest of the day slipped by without us really noticing. Later that evening, Mike floated the idea of hitting a few bars in Seaside, but we were both wiped. Even though it sounded fun in theory, the thought of waiting in line and yelling over music didn't align with how our bodies felt after a full day in the sun. We ended up crashing kind of early instead. Sometime after midnight, I woke to a shrill, piercing beeping. At first, I thought it was part of a dream, but after a few seconds lying in the dark, I realized it was real. It sounded like a smoke detector, that sharp, high-pitched alarm that cuts straight through your skull. I threw myself out of bed and scanned my surroundings, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. It didn't seem to be from my room or anywhere else on the second floor. After focusing, I got the impression it was coming from above me. Without thinking, I yanked my door open and made a beeline for Mike's room, jolting him awake with both hands and telling him to follow me. He immediately understood and hurried after me, not even bothering to put on a shirt. As if our lives depended on it, we bolted up the stairs, completely unsure of what we'd find. The third floor was mostly dark, except for a little moonlight leaking through a window at the end of the hall. We flipped on the lights and started scanning, expecting to see or smell something burning. But there was nothing. No smoke, no flickering lights, no signs of fire at all. It was baffling. After some painfully irritating minutes searching for the source of that god-awful noise, I found something. In one of the bedrooms, tucked neatly under a pillow, was a small black device. Before calling Mike in, I examined it myself, mostly out of pure confusion. It was the size of a walkie-talkie, all black except for a blinking red light on top. That was it. No buttons, no stickers, no screen, just a smooth, jet black casing, that blinking light, and what looked like a single switch on the side. I flipped it off, and the beeping stopped immediately. Mike entered the room just then, his eyes flicking from the bed to me to the device in my hand. Neither of us spoke at first. We locked eyes, and I could tell he was just as confused and scared as I was. After a few more seconds of silence, he asked if I'd ever seen that black thing before. I said no, and asked him the same, to which he also said no. For the next hour, we tried to figure out what it was, how it got there, and what had triggered it, but no answer we came up with was satisfying. Mike swore none of his family had been in the house in ages, and I believed him. Why would he lie? Plus, who would put that thing in their own home? You might think it was for safety or a substitute for a faulty smoke detector, but there was no fire, so it hadn't prevented any emergencies. And then the matter of how it had been triggered in the first place. That was the scariest part. We were sitting in Mike's room in the dark when a crazy thought occurred to me. The switch. I pulled out the device and quickly flipped it on and off, and sure enough, the shrill beeping started again and stopped as soon as I flipped it off. Both of us froze, and Mike whispered, "Oh my God." The thought hit us simultaneously. The only way to operate the device was by hand. Someone else had been in the house. We didn't waste any time. Mike dialed the police while I locked the door, barricading it as best I could. We waited for what felt like forever until the police finally showed up. We hurried downstairs to intercept them, gave a brief description of what was going on, and they did a full sweep while we waited outside by the front door as instructed. When they came back downstairs, what they told us was horrifying. Every single window on the third floor was wide open, even the bathroom windows. And it wasn't just that. The beds were flipped, drawers were pulled out of dressers, and everything was on the floor. The room where I'd found the device looked completely ransacked, even though it had been neat when we searched. I felt like I was losing my mind, and so did Mike. But after being escorted upstairs by the officers, we had no choice but to accept the reality. The officers didn't find much else. No one hiding, no prints, no weapons. After another 20 minutes or so, they told us to make sure all the windows were locked and secured from now on, and to call again if anything else happened. Then they just left. Mike, I didn't feel safe staying in that house after someone, probably crazy or on drugs, had messed with us in such an inexplicable way. But we had no choice. We told ourselves we'd sleep there the rest of the night and leave early in the morning, and that's what we did. This took place a while ago, back when I was 22. Enough years have passed now that I feel comfortable talking about it. I was freshly out of college with a desirable job and minimal expenses as I was living in my childhood home with my parents. Imagine that, racking up considerable savings without worrying about food or a place to sleep, all while having full access to my childhood room, my car, and all my hometown comforts. It's safe to say I was living in pure bliss. Believe me, I knew how lucky I was to have parents who let me stay rent-free. I know many don't have that option, so I never took it for granted. But not everything was as stress-free as you might think. What I'm about to share happened less than a month into my time back at home. I've never been what people my age call a party girl. I don't drink excessively, spend every free moment at clubs, or let men dictate my life in any way. That's just how I was raised. My father is the most important man in my life, and hookup culture disgusts me. Because of all that, my life is pretty routine. Wake up, satisfy my caffeine addiction, go to work, hit the gym, read a bit at home, mess around on my phone, and sleep. Weekends are for hiking, mini road trips, board games, and whatever else I decide to do. But one random weekend, my closest friend from college, Lindsay, invited me and our other two friends, Sabrina and Thea, to spend a few days at her family's beach house. I'd never been, but from how she described it, the place sounded like a dream. Quiet, tucked away from touristy chaos on its own private beach, just a short walk from the water. To put it bluntly, Lindsay's family is loaded. I think both her parents were neurosurgeons, so I expected the beach house to be insane, and I was far from disappointed. When I first laid eyes on it, I was struck. I'm no architect, but I know a modern-style house when I see one, and Lindsay's was ultra-modern, looking more like a covert military safe house than a personal home. I'd love to show pictures. I have plenty, but out of respect for her family, that would be in poor taste, even without what I'm about to tell you. The four of us unloaded our stuff and decided on sleeping arrangements. Lindsay obviously had enough bedrooms for each of us, but where's the fun in that? Instead, we all stayed in the same room, a kid's bedroom with 2 sets of bunk beds and an attached bathroom. We'd been there 3 nights, which in my opinion is the perfect amount of time to spend coupled up with anyone other than family. I tend to be relatively irritable, so anyone who isn't clean or polite ticks me off easily. Not that my friends are, but you know how it is. I mentioned my relatively boring lifestyle, but if there was a time to drink, it was that weekend with my friends, so I definitely planned to let loose a little more than usual. We kept the first night pretty chill, walking down to the private beach connected to the house and sitting in the sand, stargazing. The 4 of us were drinking White Claws and listening to house music on Sabrina's speaker when we noticed something in the distance. A faint flickering light emanating from further down the shore. We quieted down and watched the light flicker on and off, a sight both hypnotic and eerie. After a while, it became clear the light was swinging back and forth like a handheld flashlight someone was walking with, and soon we realized that's exactly what it was. It looked like 3 or 4 people casually strolling in our direction, not running or stumbling, but moving at a leisurely pace. As they got closer, we started hearing laughter, which helped us relax. Given how late it was likely just a group of teenagers or people our age. They must have noticed us because at some point one of them yelled out a friendly "hi" in a guy's voice that sounded around our age. Thea yelled back, and we made small talk as they approached. It was a group of 3 guys who looked maybe a year or 2 older than us, all with that typical beach boy look, which I could tell my friends were digging, especially Thea. She's a bit crazy when it comes to guys, so I wasn't too surprised. She knows how I feel about her lifestyle, so I'm not saying anything crazy. To be fair, she is drop-dead gorgeous, and I've never seen a guy not take a liking to her. The guys sat down with their beers, and the 7 of us continued drinking. It was actually a really great time. The guys weren't overtly flirtatious, but weren't boring either. Fast forward an hour and several drinks later, and they invited us back to their place. Personally, I was exhausted and leaned toward going to sleep, but I could tell all 3 of my friends wanted to keep hanging out with the boys, especially Thea. I decided not to spoil everyone's fun and called it a night for myself, telling my friends to go on without me. There were only 3 guys, after all, and I had no intention of hooking up. I walked back to Lindsay's house while the 6 of them walked along the beach, presumably toward wherever the guys were staying. I washed up and went to bed. Sometime after 3 in the morning, I woke up to a FaceTime call from Lindsay, which was confusing since she should have either been home by then or asleep next to one of the guys. I answered in a groggy voice, and what she said woke me instantly. She basically screamed into the phone that Thea and Sabrina had been kidnapped, and I needed to get her car immediately. Her words are like a bucket of ice-cold water splashed across my face. I've never felt a more intense sense of fear and adrenaline. I didn't waste a second. My hands were literally shaking as I threw on clothes and sprinted downstairs. I asked why she called me instead of the police, and she reassured me she already had. She told me to stay on the line as she walked me through it. With her instructions, I managed to open the driveway gate, find her car keys, and speed out of there in minutes. She said they were about 10 houses down the beach to the left, so that's where I started driving. She described the car and the direction it had gone, and I slammed on the gas to catch up. There wasn't a single car on the road, and I was driving at an insanely unsafe speed. A miracle I didn't get pulled over. After a few minutes, I noticed a car matching Lindsay's description driving slowly in the distance. I hung up, called the police, and told them exactly where we were. The dispatcher told me to keep my distance to avoid alerting them, so that's what I did. After what felt like forever, I spotted cop lights up ahead. The car ahead didn't try to evade the police. I can only imagine they assumed it was an unrelated stop. I pulled over and watched everything unfold. It was pure chaos. The cops forcibly removed all 3 men from the SUV at gunpoint, put them in cuffs, and escorted them to a cruiser. Then an officer walked to the trunk and opened it to reveal both Thea and Sabrina bound, and, from the looks of it, pretty badly bruised. As horrifying as the experience was, it was nothing compared to the sequence of events from their perspective. All 3 of them were comfortable with me writing this. We're still in close contact. I obviously asked them, but none wanted to write it themselves, and for good reason. To keep things short, after I went to bed, they all continued drinking. Lindsay is the only one who remembers things clearly, as she was trying to be at least a little responsible, given it was her family's house. At some point, the guys Thea and Sabrina were suggested they all go to bed, so the 4 split off while Lindsay told the 3rd guy she was going home. He was really upset, which Lindsay initially thought was because he wanted to get with her. She told him she would have been down, but had to watch the house, and he got angry. They yelled for a bit, and he ended up telling Lindsay to get out and never come back, which she was more than happy to do. Halfway home, though, she realized she'd forgotten her purse and went back to get it. That's when she saw the guys throwing Thea and Sabrina into the back of the car before driving off. She called the police, then me, and that was that. Thea's parents are both lawyers, and they jumped through dozens of hoops to do 2 things. Keep the event as far from the public sphere as possible and ensure those guys got maximum prison sentences. They accomplished both. Turns out the house they were staying in didn't even belong to them. It was owned by an old couple on vacation in another country. That, plus a slew of other charges, put them away for a long time, though I still think no sentence is long enough to compensate for what they did. As much as I hate admitting it, this traumatized me for years. I couldn't do beaches, late nights, or talk to strangers, no matter how harmless they seemed or how safe a situation felt. I became antisocial and drifted away from the girls for a while, but luckily, that's since changed. I can't even begin to imagine how this affected Thea and Sabrina. Part of me feels not remembering anything is a blessing in disguise. I think the craziest part is that had I not gone home, I might not have been able to reach Lindsay's car in time, and without that, the police may have never found those guys' car.